Hi cuties, I'm Emma. Thank you guys for being here today. We are going to make a giant daisy flower pillow together. I'm very excited. If you've never sewn before or if you're new to making pillows, this is a really good one to start with. It is quite simple. You are going to need the PDF sewing instructions that you've hopefully already received in your email address. I recommend printing them out and having them on hand. It's nice to have a hard copy while you do this. That should also include the pattern, which consists of this guy, this guy, and this guy. You're also going to need scissors or a rotary blade, whatever your choice, needles, pins, thread, a marker. I like the disappearing ink ones. If you've got one of those, pull that bad boy out. Sewing weights, not necessary, but if you like to use them, also pull those out. Fabric, you're gonna choose fabric for the center of the flower as well as the petals. You could use as much fabric as you want. You could do a different color on every petal, up to you. I encourage you to get wacky and creative. And then stuffing, which I like to use polyfill. You can use scraps of fabric, dryer lint, I don't know, cat hair, whatever you've got on hand. And then also trim. If you want to do details in the center of the petal, I recommend using a trim, but you could also cut out a different piece of fabric, some fur, whatever you want. So, without further ado, let's get to it. Okay, a few tips and tricks when it comes to picking out the fabric for this beautiful daisy. I highly recommend using a short pile or a long pile fur in the center, because where this pattern comes together in the center is often a little bit tricky to get perfect, and the fur hides the potential for imperfection quite nicely. If you're feeling super confident, literally go nuts, pick whatever fabric you want, but that's a little tidbit from me to you. And then for the petals, you could truly use any fabric you want. I personally went for this sort of linen cotton blend and a paisley. I thought maybe if I chose a patterned fabric, I would save myself the trouble of doing the details, but then of course I pulled out my trim and I couldn't help myself because I'm obsessed with detail. So then I went into my trim bins, pulled out a trim that I liked, something that looks nice with the petals. Again, sky is the limit. You could do a different fabric on every petal. You could do fabric detail here, you could do spots, you could paint, you could use a trim, you could use the same fur, you could do a different fabric on the front and the back. It's up to you. As long as you like it, it's gonna look good. Let's cut it out. Okay, so I'm gonna start today by cutting out the center fabric. I have chosen this lovely yellow fur. If you've chosen a fur for the center or any kind of fabric that has a direction that it's nice to pet it in, just be conscious of that when you cut this out. The middle pattern like this is going to be the very center of the circle, and this is going to be where it connects to each petal. So if you want your fur, for example, I think this fur is best going this way, so I want that to be the bottom. So I'm going to flip this over so that it's facing downward, and then I'm going to just go ahead and trace it. We're going to be cutting out 4 of the centerpiece. Okay, and then fur is generally something you shouldn't use scissors to cut. I'm going to use my rotary blade today, and then I'm going to switch out the blade like pretty much immediately. Okay, now we're also going to cut out the daisy center for the back of the flower. I personally like to use the fabric that I use for the petals for this, but you could also totally use the fabric that you're using for the rest of the center. So like I could use the yellow fur if I wanted to, but aesthetically I personally like the flower to have an obvious backside, and I think that that is achieved nicely, by using the same fabric that you use for the petals. Probably should have ironed this, but it's gonna be just fine. And then because this fabric is going to fray pretty easily, that just happens to be what I chose, I'm gonna do a nice little zigzag stitch along the whole perimeter of this so that when I go to hand sew it closed on the back side of the daisy, it won't fray and come apart. Now I'm going to trace this pattern. It is folded in half so that the right sides are facing in, because obviously each petal needs 2 pieces. And I think this is the best way this is going to fit on here. If you're planning on adding a trim detail to your petals, do not pin them closed yet the way that I just did here. Okay, and then when I sew this, I'm gonna wanna leave a tiny gap where I will be stuffing it. A little bigger than that maybe. You like to do it on the flat-ish side. So I put these pins here to remind me not to sew the whole thing. I recommend doing that. Okay, voila. Now I'm going to pin all of these pieces together. You're gonna place them right side up, facing each other, and then you're just gonna pin along one side. I'll be sewing that together, and then I'll open it back up, and then I'll place this, the next one, sew that together, open it back up, and then I'll sew this another piece to this side, back up, and then eventually you'll come out and it'll be a cone. And when you do the last one, you can kind of see how you want them to line up so that it's a nice crisscross. So just kind of making sure that that's as lined up as it possibly could be. Okay, so you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now this is the moment that you will add whatever details you want to add on the petal. This is a pretty loud pattern, so I actually didn't think I was gonna add a detail, but then I pulled out my trims and I decided, no, it does look nice with a little centerpiece. So I am going to be using this trim. And what I'm gonna do is, this is one petal. We got a front and a back side. So I'm gonna lay out the trim to the length that I want it to be. And I'm gonna pin it down in the center here. And I want to make sure before I cut this that I have enough to do 5 petals because I don't have a ton of this trim left. So I'm just gonna fold it over real quick and make sure. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Perfect. Okay, great. So I can cut that. And then I'm gonna sew this, and then I'm gonna place these together and sew along the perimeter. But first I'm gonna attach the trim to each of these petals. Great, okay, let's sew. So you see how I sewed sort of a little square there, you can kind of see it. Now pin this piece to this piece. I like to do it with the piece that I just added the detail to on the top, so that in case sometimes I do a bigger detail, if I do it on the top that way, I know that I'm not overlapping it or anything if I'm sewing, when I'm sewing, just in case. Okay, now it's time to sew along the perimeter. Since this fabric is sort of prone to fraying, I am going to just sew where, like, the spot that the opening is gonna be. I'm gonna do a little zigzag stitch to sort of finish this off, because eventually I'm gonna hand sew this piece closed, and I just wanna be extra sure that it's not gonna fray apart eventually. So I'm gonna do that real quick to all of these, and then I'm gonna sew the perimeters. Okay, so see how I just sort of finished off that edge so that it won't ever fray completely. If you have fabric that frays as well, I recommend doing this. You can just do a zigzag stitch along the edge so that one side of the needle is going into the fabric and the other side goes right on the outside. Inside, outside, inside, outside. Also, this is a preference, but I usually leave the underbelly, the underside, the short stem piece open. It just makes it a little less annoying to sew when we attach it eventually to the center. There's a little bit less fabric to have to punch through, and no double seams right here. So I usually will just sort of stop there, and then we can flip it inside out from this edge. Okay, so now all of these are finished and ready to rock. So what we're gonna do next is we're going to align them along the perimeter of the center piece that we have going. So I like to start with one on the seam, this seam and that seam, and then I like to just put 2 pins in each, and the petals themselves should almost overlap. So like place them really right up against each other with maybe even like a tiny bit of overlap is how I like to do it. That last one might overlap a little bit more than the others, so that's okay. I try not to be too precious about getting that perfect. So it should look like that when it's all pinned. And then I'm gonna go ahead and just sew around the edge right here. Okay, so now you've got your flower. She's beautiful. You're gonna flip her over and you're gonna place that backside piece that you cut out before on the back, and we're gonna sew her on. So to do that, this is gonna be about the trickiest thing we've done so far, sewing wise. I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna put the right sides together and I'm gonna pin it along about as far as I can go, matching up the edges and pinning sort of where I know this line is here. I'm gonna pin just right below that so that I know where to sew so that it doesn't show up when I flip her inside out. And eventually you're gonna reach a point where it's sort of folding in on itself. It's a lot of fabric, and so you're not gonna be able to get this circle completely closed. You see what it's doing here? So I like to sort of fold and roll and tuck the petals that I know are gonna fit underneath there, and it makes it a little easier to sort of keep pinning, because you wanna pin as much of it as you can so that you can sew most of it with the machine. And then what you can't sew with the machine, you will hand sew. And you do want there to be an opening anyway so that you can stuff it. Okay, so yeah, perfect. So this is the opening. That's a great amount for me to stuff it and hand sew it shut. So I'm gonna sew this with the machine now. And then you can kind of check yourself before you even flip it to make sure that the line that you just sewed is inside of those other lines so that you're not going to see it when you flip it inside out. And then my favorite part, the flipping inside out. Be nice and gentle with this part if you've got fabric that frays easily. Et voila! She's beautiful. Okay, and now for the fun part, we get to stuff it. Okay, and I personally love to stuff things from the comfort of my couch, but that's just a personal preference. And also, it's where I keep my stuffing. You can get stuffing at places like Joann's or Michael's. I personally buy it in bulk in the Fabric District in LA. There's also totally tons of different things you could use for stuffing if you don't have access to polyfiber, or polyfill rather. And I like to kind of like use my hand, one hand to sort of hold open the hole and the other to sort of push in the stuffing. You'll come up with your own method that feels the best. And you can also choose how much stuffing you want to use. I personally like the way it looks, usually depending on the fabric, when it's pretty stuffed, but you don't want it to be too hard because then it's just not comfortable to lay on. So you kind of have to find that nice little in-between and stuffing it to you know, to what you think is about right, and then sort of finessing, zhuzhing if you will. Zhuzhing if you will. Okay, so I always do this, but it's actually a lot easier to sew the center back piece closed if you stuff it and sew that first before you do the petals. I always forget. Okay, time to hand sew. Okay, so I was doing a ladder stitch or an invisible stitch for the first couple of petals, but I didn't like the way that it was ruching the fabric, so I switched over to a classic whip stitch. It's a little more obvious along the seam, but it doesn't bunch the fabric. So that's a personal preference. Do whatever you feel looks best for you. I slapped my tag on there because I'm a professional businesswoman, and she's all done. Okay, and voila, you have yourself a daisy pillow or perhaps a daisy hat. I won't dictate how you use it. I hope you had fun making this today. If you made one to completion, I would love to see it. Please tag me in it or send me a DM with a photo. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please like, comment, subscribe, blah, 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 blah. Maybe invite your friends over and I'll do it together. I would literally cry if I heard about something like that happening. If you have any questions, please comment them here or email me dreamgigglesdesigns@gmail.com. I will try and answer as fast as humanly possible. Whew. Thank you for supporting me. It really means the world. I hope you have a lovely day. Toodaloo!